Hi, I'm Alaura Weaver, Director of Enterprise Content at Writer.
And I'm Diego Lomanto, CMO at Writer.
On this episode of Humans of AI, we're talking to Colin Kelton, former CMO at Vanguard. Diego, why are you excited about talking to Colin?
I mean, there's a lot of reasons to be excited to talk to Colin. He is a legend in the field. He was the CMO at Vanguard since 2000, and I think he's been with Vanguard since 1990. So he's a real veteran of our craft, and he got to market an incredible brand that he not only accelerated, but he did it while protecting the core attributes of that brand, which were its prestigious nature, it's the trust you put in it, it's, real principled thinking. And he did that as he scaled it from when he joined, it was a large business already. And I'll let him share the numbers. But when he left, it was a tremendously large business. And so he was able to maintain that respected brand attribute, which I think is the strongest attribute of their brand over the course of that growth.
In addition to being CMO, he also took the helm of Chief Communications Officer.
Yeah. And he was instrumental in bringing AI into Vanguard. So, he continued to grow and progress and adapt as time went on. And so I think there's a lot to learn from Colin on the craft of marketing, adapting over the longevity, playing the long game, and really staying current with your market as it changes and grows.
Awesome. Let's get into our conversation with Colin, and stay tuned after for Diego and I to get into our takeaways, next steps for marketing leaders, and insights from this conversation.
All right, everyone. I am joined here today by Colin Kelton. Colin, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure, Diego. Thank you, and thanks for having me. My name is Colin Kelton. I am the recently retired Global Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Communication Officer of Vanguard, where I worked for 36 years.
Wow. So, Colin, that means you joined Vanguard in what, 1990?
1990. That's 1990. Correct.
World has changed a lot since 1990.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit. Obviously, a very illustrious and successful career. But not only that, in marketing, staying power of 35 years, you stayed at Vanguard for 35 years. Most people I talk to on this podcast, will have a couple of companies on their resume. They'll talk about their career arc and the changes they made along the way. But you stayed with Vanguard. So before we talk about AI and how that's changed over the course of your career, I want to ask, what does it actually feel like from the inside to build something with that much permanence and longevity in one place?
Yeah, I mean, it feels amazing. When I was obviously a little younger when I started 36 years ago and didn't realize exactly what was going to happen, obviously. And I haven't been in marketing for 36 years, but my first real marketing job at Vanguard was 2000. So, okay, 26 years.
All right, 26 years.
With some interspersed things here or there. But, I got incredibly lucky from a career standpoint to join a firm that was just on the cusp of, really blowing up. And at the time when I joined, Jack Bogle was the head of the company. He was the founder. We had $43 billion
Yeah.
the day I started. And Jack Bogle would say, I think we're done growing. Like, that's it. Like, I don't know where the next $1 billion is coming from. And, by the time I left, we had $13 trillion and of other people's money, not our own money, of other people's money. And it was just an amazing thing to be there and help contribute to the building of a company that's just so successful and, rather iconic today, 36 years later for me and 50 years for the company.
And what was the path to marketing for you? You mentioned that you started, you moved into marketing in 2000. What were you doing before that?
I was running parts of the business and parts of the operations. When I started Vanguard was very operational. Roughly 80% of the people that worked at the firm were kind of operational people, hourly workers, because high processing and phone centers, and we still have a lot of that. I eventually rose up to help run some of the businesses. And honestly, by lieu of that, I was asked to go run part of the marketing organization because at the time it was, you may not be an expert in marketing, at least not yet, 26 years ago, but you really know our business and you know Vanguard. And I trust you to run part of the marketing department was kind of how I got there.
That's so interesting because from the outside looking in, I think Vanguard, and maybe this is a credit to you and your work, from a brand perspective, has always seemed to be authentic and rooted in its principles, right? And it sounds like someone who had been there for 10 years, was a carrier of the principles, right? Was trusted to take this function that needed to express the principles effectively. Is that a fair kind of analysis?
I think that's fair. We wanted to remain true to ourselves, and obviously, the company still does, even though it's in some regards, a vastly different company now than it was back then. But, we were, back then rather insular, and I think for a while that probably served our purposes well, in that we remained distinctive and had a message that was just not informed by the outside world, if you will, and what other people were saying. And by the time that we kind of picked our heads up, if you will, and said, all right, we really need to be part of everything else going on, we had established that
Yeah,
message.
right.
And now you can take that and you can add things to it, but still you're not going to lose the Vanguard message.
It's an amazing example of the idea that brand is not just a logo, a color, a website. It is the
Right.
entirety of everything that makes that company unique and different, and how you experience that. I think it might be the best example I could think of off the top of my head if someone were to ask me that.
Yeah, the differentiation is and was critical. And, now it's more the differentiation, we have to worry about it because other people are copying us more than we're copying anybody else, obviously.
Right,
Like
right.
other people are, some other company will use words and it's like, wait a minute, those really sound like our words. I'm not really sure that that's that company. Sounds great, but they're really talking about us, not themselves.
Which is not a way to actually win and differentiate yourself.
Right,
So
right.
so so okay, 2000 you become head of marketing, but in 2018 you were the first ever global CMO. What was happening in that moment that Vanguard decided they needed a global CMO? What was it like to step in that position?
Yeah, so in 2000, I ran marketing for one of the businesses, and then we had a number of we had 3 or 4 major US businesses, and I ran one of them. I marketed for one of them. I did that for 5 years. I then went to Australia, and I was the CEO of Vanguard Australia for 3.5 years. But then when I was asked to come back to be the global chief marketing officer, it was really a nod towards, frankly, marketing being very critical. And not that it wasn't critical before, but we had grown to a certain size. The competitors were copying our words. We had to really double down on the differentiation and think about it. Marketing itself was, you know, gaining traction from a FTE standpoint in the firm and getting rather large. So there was a component of needing one person to sit over top this growing organization that required technology, required people, required messaging, and making sure that, in the world of, now with social media and everything else, that, there was a tie that all these different marketing organizations were working together and not, it would be at odds, but have the same messaging, if you will, throughout. And that was a bit the impetus for the role.
That makes sense. And was it also a nod to the importance and the role of technology in the marketing function as well? Because I think you spent a big number on marketing technology every year, right?
Yes. Not as it was asked of me, but I and some others made it so.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So, one of the things that I saw when I got, back from Australia and took this role was, we didn't have a marketing tech stack. We had, all these mini tech stacks all over the place. And in my previous role, I could buy a piece of marketing technology just for my own, business department. But we had 3 of this and 2 of that and 5 of those. And oh, one person liked one analytics system, another person liked another analytics system. So, I convinced the organization to give me money to rip it all out and redo the entire tech stack and have a single tech stack throughout the firm, and to the extent that we can do it internationally as well.
Obviously, I would align and as a marketer and marketers listening here understand and agree with, but that's not a trivial project.
It's not a trivial project, and it's not one where you see the obvious results on day one. When you say this was, an easy example, when you say I want somebody to build a new website, it's like, right, when you're done, you see the new website. When we were done, we were still sending emails or producing ads or, moving work through the system. And people are like, well, I don't quite understand what I'm getting for that. But we
Yeah, right.
we certainly stepped up our game from a speed standpoint, we lowered the risk. We had aging technology, which, and that was part of my sell, obviously. I went in and said, look, we had a piece of technology. We were only one of the only clients left on this technology.
I've been there before, selling and supporting a technology that I've
Right.
worked at a companies that acquired a company that had like four giant customers, and they're the only ones using it. And like on the other side, like they're always making the equation of like, how much do we put into supporting this? What is it? How much maintenance? So on the customer side, there's a lot of risk there.
Absolutely. Things were bright. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And we went from consultants or whatever looking at us and saying, "You guys are years and years and years behind from a marketing technology standpoint." To the point now where the firm, with our technology partners and various vendors, we're getting the beta products. And it's like, can you test this out? What do you think? Does this work for you?
Yeah.
So we're now at the leading edge cusp, completely different. And the last thing I'll say about that is we obviously didn't know anything about AI per se when we started that in 2018, 2019. But had we not done that, we would not have been able to take advantage of what happened with AI and all the newer technology. We would have had to redo all that and then join the AI boom.
Right, right. So not only did it have a lot of benefit to just running the marketing machine, but it sets you up to be more progressive in terms of technology for the future. Were you able to sell that? Did that make sense to folks internally, or is it more like, how did you? What was the ROI business case you actually like got got people behind?
Their RI business case honestly had a lot to do with retiring old technology that was getting pretty expensive. It had to do with, reducing the risk of technology that was going to break. And we did have a fairly sizable component to the RI that say we're going to be faster, we're going to know our clients better, we're going to use better data, we're going to target them more, and we may be able to reduce cost of various marketing campaigns. Of course, as everyone who's a CMO or technologist listening to this, every time you do that, somebody asks you to do something new and the work increases. And so, it's always hard to, show that ROI because no one ever says we want to stop marketing something, just slow that down. It's always more and more.
Okay, and so tell me a little bit about now as the running as the global CMO, aligning the brand across those different units and segments and different departments. I've heard you talk about Vanguard East. What does that mean? And what is the moment maybe you saw someone say something or write something and you thought that's not us, that's not how we sound.
A couple thoughts come to mind on that one. So one is, and these things are related. Although we had distinctive divisions, those messages in each of those divisions play against each other. So we have one very successful division that sells to largely independent financial advisors and bank advisors. And if we're marketing something to them, they are very likely also an individual investor with Vanguard. And if we say something on the individual investor side that says, oh, Vanguard is great at this, or you have to come to Vanguard for this, and they're actually on the other side trying to sell to their own clients the same thing. It's like, well, wait a minute. Like, I'm a client on one side, I'm buying your product on another side. Those things sound rather at odds with each other. And how do I do so? Making sure that those messages, come together and we're not out there just one division saying whatever they want to say without any regard to another division whose clients might have an overlap. So that was a big part of it. From a Vanguard East standpoint, look, look, we are seen as a serious brand. You can't be silly in your messaging, you can't be goofy, and, I would see things or others would see things where people would try to be trendy or try to say things that were, a bit tongue in cheek. And our client base just, Jack Bogle was not a tongue in cheek kind of guy. And
Right? Right.
Jack would stop me in the hallway when he was still alive and ask me why we're spending all this money on marketing. I said, "Well, Jack, you were the best marketer we ever had. We're just spending all this money to replace you," because his messages were what cut through everything.
That's so interesting because marketing leaders, one of the hardest things to do is kill something that is good and maybe creative and interesting, and and actually like resonates, but isn't on brand. That's a big part of the job, right? Just like really being that steward and shepherd.
It is a big part of the job, and it would always frustrate me, sometimes when, I wanted one group to steal somebody else's branding message. Like, we'd have very high level company branding, but, even like if you call it the second tier branding, like some of those campaigns would work really well. An ad developed in Australia looks beautiful, change, a bit the voiceover, and not have an Aussie accent, and it'll be great. And it's like, well, we don't want to do that. And like every marketer wants to have their own spin on the creativity and do their own market research, all this sort of stuff. And sometimes that's really needed. Other times it's Vanguard's been in business now for 50 years. You don't have to recreate what Vanguard stands for or what it means to people. So stop being so creative, if you will, sometimes.
Right. So part of the job is creating the culture where that uniformity is actually looked at as a positive, not a negative.
That's right.
And spinning that over to AI, let's talk a little bit about that distinctiveness of Vanguard, how companies that are thinking about how to imbue their own voice with AI now as a lever for execution. I've heard you say if you're worried about the sea of sameness, AI might compound it, but you probably weren't different enough to begin with. That's an interesting and provocative statement. Can you explain more about what you mean there?
Well, I think some of the things we're seeing, I'd be interested in what you're seeing as well. Some of the things we're seeing with AI, obviously, is your ability to produce a lot more, your ability to go quicker, certainly your ability to, target specific client bases. But that messaging that you have, AI also takes what you have said and, you know, says it again. Like that's a bit the beauty sometimes of being fast, and training a system to speak like you. Well, if you've never spoken in a way that's distinctive,
Agreed. Yeah.
then you're not going to create it by putting AI on top. You still need the human interaction to do. And if you haven't done that already, then it's going to be really hard because the system's going to pick up everything that you've said before and put a bit of a spin on it, but say it again and say it many, many, many times. It's like, well, it's just reproducing your lack of distinctiveness.
That's right. I'm in violent agreement on this, and this is, I think, the first thing when I go and talk to, prospective writer customers or just in general other marketing leaders is the value and importance of a distinctive brand is higher than ever.
That's right.
AI has made it more important than ever because it loves to please us and sound good, and mid stuff can sound pretty good, but it sounds like everything else. And the only way you break out of that is if you give it something that has a unique spin to work on. Is that fair?
I completely agree. And I think a lot of the, at least initial cases and people working on with AI are rather tactical, rather lower funnel marketing messages.
Yeah, right.
And that's great. But I think, and I've said this before, like people are going to have to spend more money on high level branding than they've spent in the past. And that's a bit like, well, wait a minute. Why do we have to do that? And we've got this. Well, you need to get that very distinctive brand message out. You still need to do that. And whether you're using AI to do that, but you need humans to do that. You've got to spend money at the top of the funnel, perhaps even more so. And it's not any not any easier for a CMO to go convince people to give them, money at the top of the funnel sometimes.
I know, and especially when you have this productivity motion that is easy to point to and get alignment behind. I'm going to drive efficiency, and that's what that's the first tranche of value is that efficiency. But a lot of marketers are stuck there, and they're not getting out of that. And I think their brands are regressing to some degree because of that.
I agree. And it's certainly how we started at first saying, oh, we're going to go do this and we're going to be able to, reduce heads here, through not hiring or however we're going to do it. And, while that was true in some cases, the work ticks up in other places. But we really eventually figured out, and others are figuring this out, and we're still, Vanguard's still figuring this, like, you can get higher quality, you can go faster, you can target better. And as someone once said to me, or CEO once said to me, when I was talking about efficiency once, like, that would be great if you could do that. On the other hand, if you can add a zero to the revenue line, that would be a lot better.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to start using that because that is so true. We can't get stuck in just efficiency. Then you're just a cost cutter.
That's right. That's right.
So going back to the distinctiveness, I think that's also fascinating in the sense that the discovery process is changing because of AI, right? Because of chatbots, chat engines, Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, AI answers. The fundamental behavior of the consumer is changing in a way that probably is the most drastic since what, mobile, right?
Right. Right.
And what's interesting is that it kind of rhymes with SEO, right? AEO kind of rhymes with SEO, but it's pretty different. It's less mechanical and less deterministic than SEO was, and there's much more involved in brand and comms as a way to increase your visibility to the AI engines. Now, in 2024, you added chief communications officer to your responsibility. So I'm curious, like, what was it like to hold both of those titles at the same time? What's, this is going to be a big question, but like, what is the difference between brand and comms? And, was that somewhat inspired by what was happening in the world of AI and technology?
I'd love to say it was inspired. It wasn't, in that sense.
I don't think we knew it 2024.
We didn't know it. And, it was more, the functions were already working really well together at our firm. And so, honestly, a good friend of mine retired, and it's like we couldn't find someone to take a spot. And it's like, Colin, will you do this for a few months? And 2 years later, I was still doing it. It's like, now I'm going to retire. But as we already knew in the back of our heads, what the PR team says and what the marketing team says has to sound very similar and want to be on brand and all that. But of course, now what we have discovered is, our ability to impact those LLM results is much greater than what we used to hire people who really understood SEO. And as long as you had a really good guess, because no one really knew, but a good guess as to what Google's methodology was, you were going to be pretty good. You were tagging pages and showing up, and you could just go to Google and just Google something and just see what the results were. And it's like, yep, we're top one or top two. We must have nailed something there.
It was gamified to some degree,
Yeah.
right? Like, you knew the rules. Like, if you could understand the rules, then you can operate within the rules to manipulate the results.
And I think the rules are just changing. There will still be rules, but the rules are now changing, and they're a bit more out of our control. So now what we see is, the engines are frankly smarter, and so they're looking for more evidence that your brand or your product should be served up as an answer to whomever is asking the question. And Google tried to do this. What's the relevancy? And they were, it was all good intent from their standpoint as well. But now it's expanded. So it's looking for third parties. It's looking at social media. It's looking at Reddit. It's looking for press. It's looking for endorsements. And it's just becoming more comprehensive. And so, on the one hand, that's great for marketing and communications to work together on that, because you want to make sure that if you're going to go out with a new product where it's like, all right, we need to cover the complete waterfront from a PR and social media and all, why wouldn't you, on the one hand? But you've got to do that in order to show up in these LLM search results, or you're going to be invisible.
Given everything you just said, I think the answer there is, once again, apply really strong, basic, fundamental comms principles and PR and awareness principles to your brand, because those signals are what the engines pick up on, and you can't manipulate it as easily as you could SEO. So I think it's bringing back the importance of brand, PR, comms, awareness, in a way that it's actually really good for, I think, the industry.
Yeah, and it's harder for sure, because there's more things to worry about. There's more, you need more people in the room, if you will, say, all right, here's what we're going to do. On the other hand, it's all stuff somewhat should want to
Yeah,
do
that's what
anyway.
I'm getting at.
Like you
Yeah.
want to be out there with these messages. And, years ago, we would call it surround sound messaging. And it's like, no matter where someone goes, you want them to hear about your product and, or your company. So why wouldn't you want to do it? But it requires more work.
For the marketers listening, I think a big takeaway is this should help you sell the value of doing this work inside your company more easily than it might have been before. You should take advantage of that. You should leverage that. When you go to your CFO and your CEO, this is good marketing. Having, aligned comms, strong awareness, amplifying your message through third parties is hard to measure, but useful. Like you just know it, right? You know that helps.
You're just right.
But it's always hard to quantify, and we've always been battling for the budgets to do these things. I think AI visibility gives you a good flank on which to make that argument that wasn't around 3 years ago.
That's right. And, people would make the arguments to me years ago. It's like, does that high level marketing work? Do all these there's a lot of people who intellectualize their way to thinking that they're not impacted by marketing messages.
Yeah.
We're all impacted by marketing messages.
Yeah.
And now, those people that would intellectualize that are also the ones who are out there making sure that they're using LLMs to get their answers to their questions and they're buying decisions. How are those LLMs? What are those LLMs listening to? They're listening to all that. So, you may not have to be doing it yourself, watching TV and listening to these ads or whatever, but the LLMs are. They're listening to all these ads and all the social media and the Reddit posts.
And then it's passing through to you.
And it's passing through.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the decisions you made with AI technology. One of them was that using Writer, but aside from Writer, what was not the decision to use the vendor, but what was the moment you realized you could actually train an AI tool to speak Vanguardese? How did you determine that? How did you test that? What convinced you that it could be done?
Well, one of the things, and, this is actually a writer comment, is that, having a system that was in a way not necessarily impacted by the rest of the world from a messaging standpoint, but by your own messaging, Diego, I think the answer to the question was actually in your question. Like, once it was explained how you're doing this, that you are actually training a system to speak like you do that with people. You hire somebody new and it's like, here's how we want to say things. And when you can suddenly train the system to do that and you can put in new inputs, etc., it just becomes, from a standpoint of a company like Vanguard, which is one, incredibly successful, but two, still has high aspirations and goals and is growing and is expanding products and looking for new clients. And that's, on the one hand, a marketer's dream. It's like, that's great. A company that's going like this is great. On the other hand, it's like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get all that work done? How am I going to get all these messages out there? And now a system that can do this for you, it just almost seemed too good to be true. But of course, now we know it's true.
Yeah. And not a writer commercial here, but in any of these tools, I think what has worked really well for Writer as a product that brand organizations love is the harness itself is designed to accentuate the brand and put the guardrails around the brand and governance around the brand that I think a lot of folks are waking up to right now, that it's important. But it was the founding thesis for the company itself, actually. And so we've just been always heads down focused on that.
Yeah. And, I mentioned earlier, like, Vanguard just is not a brand that would do anything tongue in cheek silly. But still, you can get a human saying, hey, wouldn't that be great if it's like, the system's not going to do that. Now you still need the system to be expansive and think a bit differently sometimes, but the humans can do that. But you can more easily maintain that brand consistency.
Yeah.
Which, we talked about before, like, and if that brand consistency is differentiated, that's great. If that brand consistency is not differentiated, then you're just...
Yeah, that's right. In a way, this is actually a really good thing for brand consistency. You can, because you're encoding the rules and, in a company that has 30 marketers, 50 marketers, maybe even 100 marketers, the CMO can control that. We talked about killing a campaign that was too tongue in cheek, right? But when it comes to like writing a blog post that you'll never see, right? Because just doesn't get to your desk. that gets harder to control when you have a company that's managing $13 trillion of assets and is in all, like how many countries? 90 more than probably, I don't
I'm
know.
not, yeah. Well, you can buy the product in many
Yeah,
countries.
right.
So, you know,
So you have all these people doing the work, putting that harness around it, so that you can ensure that brand at scale doesn't break. I think is one of the
that's
best
right.
things I see about AI as a marketer. Actually, I think it makes me
Agreed.
excited. Now, what about you know bringing AI to a marketing organization that is so firmly established, that grew under your leadership for 26 years? Now you're introducing AI. What was that like, and what was maybe the hardest part about that?
Well, and it's still hard. And, you ask the question, because it is a big concern in many parts of an organization, but marketing is certainly one of them where, the specter of replacing people is real. And I've been trained for this my whole life and, this sort of stuff. So, that is and still is the hard part. It's arguably, in my opinion anyways, easier for a firm like Vanguard that just continues to grow and do new things, and, like, there's just not a lack of work.
Yeah, right.
There's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
not a lack of things to worry about, and, people are moving throughout the firm and all, and so, once we kinda got that out, it's like, "Look, we're not," if we ever wake up one day as we're out of work, like, let me know, but, like, that hasn't happened in, now, although I've now retired, like, 36 years, you know, like, the company is not lacking for things to do. It's incredibly innovative, and there's new and new things coming out, so but that said, I had an organization of hundreds of people. And, one of the things I think people probably make the mistake of doing is try to convince hundreds and hundreds of people. And look, this stuff just, as much as people want to think it does, it just doesn't change overnight. So starting with a small group who's really into it and having them innovate and then kind of expand out. If you try to take I had a 500-600 person organization, try to take the whole organization and turn it on a dime. It's just one, it wouldn't work anyway, but it's like you just can't do it.
I think that what you just walked through, being authentic and truthful about it's not going to solve every problem we have. We also don't know exactly how this is going to evolve over the next couple of years, so we need to partner with you to figure out what this means and how this ends up. But as you said, we've never been in a place where we have no work to do. We always have more that we could do, and this may help us get there. Like I found being authentic and honest about the situation gives people a little more comfort.
I think that's exactly correct, Diego. And I think, people are listening to the hype cycle in the news, and, we're recording this in the summer. And so what just happened, we had all these people doing graduation speeches all throughout the US. And how many of them did you see on social media talking about AI and the specter of AI and all this sorts of stuff? Yep, AI is real and it's going to have a huge impact. But, the world has been through lots of innovative technological changes and continues to move forward. And, we're not replacing everybody's job, in September. It's going to be a slower burn than people think.
Yeah, and not to get too personal, but I have a son who's who's going to sophomore year of college, and a daughter who's going off to college, and she wants to study business and marketing, right? So, I think about this deeply all the time, and what I'm for both of them, I'm telling them to right now focus on learning how to think critically, learn the systems, but don't abdicate critical thinking, don't abdicate creativity, don't abdicate the ideas and the sparks and deep thought, but be adaptable, learn the principles of what good looks like in the chosen field, and then learn how to harness AI to make that better.
My youngest son's going to be a senior in college next year. I say the exact same things. And, we've heard other people say this, or we've said it ourselves. It's, the people that are going to have a problem, if you will, are the ones that refuse to use it versus
Yes.
using it. You've got to go out and you need to be a user of it. I remember, just a bit of an aside, when we were developing, some of the web capabilities and, the iPhone came out, There were people at Vanguard who didn't want to create an app.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
crazy
Right.
to think of that now, but it's like, will people ever use it? We don't want people day trading on Vanguard, all this sort of stuff. And it's like, no, we created the app. Vanguard has now thousands and thousands more people than it did back then. Like, and didn't take anybody's job.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Now, advice to the CMO who's sitting in the middle of AI transformation. What's a piece of hard-won wisdom from 35 years that you think is applicable that you could give those folks sitting in it right now?
I think the very first thing is you need to be in there doing this yourself. You need to have it on your system. You need to have it on your desktop. Many people, even though I kind of started in marketing a bit at a higher level, if you will, I'm still in marketing for a long time. For those CMOs that are out there that grew up in a traditional marketing organization, writing, like doing all the things somewhat manually, it's really hard to get your head around because you've not used it yourself.
Yeah,
You've got to go out and use it
you got
yourself.
it.
And,
Great.
use it personally. And many people are probably already using it personally, but use whatever systems you're getting for the people that work for you. Use it yourself, and whether you're actually going to produce anything with it or not, but you probably could. You could probably write a memo. You're like, there's lots that you can do for your own thing, but you need to be out there seeing it for yourself and using it yourself.
I agree with that. Marketing principles alone will not carry you far enough in this tidal wave. When we got email, when we got marketing automation, when we got mobile, when we got CDP, and we were able to do data at scale, those were built upon marketing fundamentals that just kind of elevated and supercharged the things that marketing could do. This actually is changing the landscape so dramatically that if you don't get hands-on with it, you just can't understand how the actual world and the function is changing.
That's right.
Okay, wonderful conversation, Colin. We like to close the podcast with a couple of rapid fire questions. So quick answers. First thing that comes to mind. Ready to go?
Yeah.
Okay. What is one marketing skill that you think becomes more valuable because of AI, not less?
Writing skills.
Okay, interesting. All right, we're not supposed to go deep dive, but why are writing skills more valuable?
Because you still need to, and when I mean writing skills, I mean the ability to read something that's well written and perhaps writing it yourself.
Yes.
What you need to do is because of all the stuff that's going to be produced, you still need to spend some time reading some things to understand what your organization's putting out there. So, and you need to be able to say, oh, that's a really well crafted, well written,
Yes.
like,
yeah.
Otherwise it's the system's just going to produce. And, we've heard of AI slop. It's just going to produce, like, you need to sit there and say, yes, that's actually still really well done.
Yeah. And I guess you can't lose the reps of writing. You have to write. You have to keep writing, because otherwise you won't be able to assess it. What's the most common mistake teams are making when they're bringing AI into the organization and maybe trying to automate something that they did before?
Most common mistake people are making is thinking that everything is going to change overnight as soon as you do this. It's going to take some time. You need to train the system. You need to understand what works, what doesn't work for you and for your organization, thinking that it's just bam.
I think that that axiom of, we overestimate what can be done in a year, but underestimate what can be done in 5 or 10 years. I think that applies here. It's massively transformational, but it takes some time. It's not going to be all done in weeks.
Right.
What's a piece of advice that you used to swear by that AI has completely changed your mind on?
Oh, that's a good one. That the creative aspect of how something looks is perhaps more important than speed. And what I mean by that is, look, again, you need to be distinctive and all this, but being fast, we've always thought being fast is important, but being fast is now critical. And perfection sometimes can be the end of the progress, right? It's like you need to get out there because your competitors are out there, and nothing that we've said previous does. All that still holds distinctiveness, but speed is going to be incredibly important because people are making rapid fire decisions. You need to be out there fast.
That's interesting. I've always set when I sit with my team and we're faced with a deadline and we're thinking about pushing a deadline because something's not ready. I've always said no one's going to remember that it was a couple of days late, but they'll remember if it's not great, right?
Right.
to the point you're making, like we have less wiggle room in that rule now because things are
Right,
moving
right.
so fast that, you miss a cycle, now you're 2 cycles behind. So
Yes,
the speed,
yeah, exactly.
that's fair. How do we stay human while growing business in the age of AI? How do we make sure we stay human here?
I think it comes back to the same stuff we thought about with the internet and everything. It's like at the end of the day, there are still people consuming the messages, and we're one of those people. And it's still, does that make sense to us? Does that sound like we want it to sound? There is still, and will, in my opinion, always be this a person sitting there who is saying, that's good, that's not good. This sounds like us, that doesn't sound like us. You still, you want the systems to do, but you want to be in control of the systems.
Yeah, my shortcut for that is make sure you keep talking to customers. That to me, that's been the short, like just the easiest way to make sure we stay human is because when you're looking at, more than just the output, but how the output, who's receiving the output, that helps me,
Right.
maintain that.
I like that.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. If there's one thing that you'd like CMOs to take away from this conversation, what is it?
I think that the thing to really think through is we don't know the answer yet. As much as there's something people out there's like, here's what we don't necessarily know exactly the end game. We know where it's headed. We know it's going to be big. We know that this is real. And this is one of the real changes everyone's going through, but we don't know how it's going to wind up. So you need to be out there messing around with it in the system, trying it out, not putting pressure on yourself that by the end of 2026, you're going to know what the answer is and your marketing organization's now set for the next 20 years. It's still forming. But the most successful ones are out there in it, making some mistakes, maybe using something that doesn't work, but you need to be in the mix.
All right. Perfect words of wisdom to end the session on. Colin, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed this conversation and looking forward to for the rest of the folks to get and listen to this. Great talk today.
Thanks, Diego. It's always great talking to you. You guys do a great job. You do a great job yourself. So thank you.
All right. So you just spoke with the CMO of Vanguard, former CMO of Vanguard. No big deal.
What a legend. He's awesome.
36 years?
Yeah. I mean, 36 years, 26, was it 26 at the head of marketing, right? A world-renowned brand. I just loved how he understood his job. He had a phenomenal asset, the reputation of Vanguard. He protected it, enriched it, and grew it as the company grew, and transitioned it from founder-led to, an eternal, lasting enterprise. And so, just a lot to learn there. And he's just a great guy too, right? It's a lot of fun. He was a lot of fun to talk to. I really enjoyed it.
You and I both work in an industry where staying at the same firm for 5 years makes you an institution there,
Yes.
let alone
right.
decades. And he's kind of like this living artifact of Vanguard culture, brand, business strategy, just in one person.
Well, I think it showed you how important it was to them that they maintained a consistency and stayed true to what made them what they are, which is why like he wasn't in running he wasn't a marketer, and they said for the guy or the gal that we wanted running marketing, we want someone who understands who Vanguard is deeply to steward that. So I thought that was a really interesting part of the conversation, and I learned and something I learned from him. It was great.
So anything surprise you from the conversation?
Not I wouldn't call it surprising, but illuminating when you peel back and he talked about the tech stack needing to be consolidated.
Yeah, you guys were nerding out about that.
Yeah, but if you've ever worked in a large company, you know how large companies grow, especially if there's inorganic growth. You have all these differences. You have all these different teams doing these different things. In his particular case, all these different regions, kind of went off and did their thing. And I loved how he took a step back and said, to fuel the next wave of growth, we can't do it with this fragmentation. We're going to have to do it with a unified tech stack. So I thought that was, illuminating for me.
Yeah. And also how he sold it.
How he sold it. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's the question. How do you sell it? And I think
it's almost like he's in marketing.
Yeah. I was going to say, he positioned it well. And it's not a trick, but a lot of the times the dollar value and the ROI aren't the main reason why you want to do it as a marketer. That the soft effect of doing this, or the long-term unquantifiable effect, is really going to be the mover and important, but hard to quantify. So you find and lean on the ROI to get the strategic stuff done that might be harder to quantify.
Anything where you are nodding, yeah, I've been there. Yeah, I'm here right now.
Yeah, I think guarding your brand. We are not a Vanguard sized brand, and we still have the challenge of brand fragmentation and saying no to things, and understanding how to keep your brand consistent is challenging even for a company our size. So I can just imagine what it's like at Vanguard. So hearing him talk about how he put emphasis on that, I was nodding along to that for sure.
Yeah. Any moments of like you parted ways in terms of points of view, or?
Well, he's a Phillies fan and I'm a Mets fan, and that we didn't talk about it on the podcast, but I didn't want it to rail.
But he finds every possible opportunity to needle you about it. So
he does. Yeah. So that's our biggest contention.
2 different brands. Right?
2 different brands, 2 different value props. No, I don't know. I don't think there was much. I think we were in alignment on a lot of the points.
Anything that you're like, man, I wish more CMOs understood this when he said it?
The investments in PR and comms. I think that was a really important point that he made, especially when it comes to AI visibility. It's still a little bit of a black box, so I won't say this is solved, but I do think that he brought to fore the fact that comms, PR, it's not just about the mechanics of deconstructing AI visibility into a formula. It's the stuff that you do, the comm stuff that you do, is more important than ever in AI age, which is a little counterintuitive because you think it would just be very formulaic. But it's not. It does require you investing in those channels more than you were before.
Yeah, I mean, the LLMs for now, what's been being observed is they are looking to Reddit, looking to LinkedIn, looking to press releases for the data that they need to come up with their answers. And also, frankly, that's because that is the most recent content that's constantly updated, versus 2-year-old content that they were trained on, right?
Well, it's also harder to gain. It's third-party validation. And so influencing the influencers is important when the LLMs know that this is, I guess, because how it does its searches, it's still, hard to really distill. But from what you can see in the way they work, the LLMs are giving a lot of weight to third-party validation. And so you got to work to get that third-party validation. You can't ignore it.
Any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
No, just feel, lucky to talk to a marketing legend like him. And everything he says still has a lot of relevance today. So it's great to spend time with him.
A lot to learn from him.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Thanks, Diego.
Thank you, Laura.